In the chronicles of medieval warfare, velocity was an unimaginable luxury. Armies were ponderous leviathans, tethered to cumbersome supply lines, unforgiving topography, and glacial communications. Yet, at the twilight of the 14th century, the European continent collided with a sovereign who entirely dismantled the established orthodoxies of military logistics. He was the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I. He did not merely march to war, he struck with the sudden violence of a storm. His adversaries genuinely harbored the belief that he wielded dark sorcery, for his legions traversed the earth with a celerity deemed humanly impossible. He could be engaged in a grueling attrition campaign amidst the crags of Anatolia, and mere weeks later, his imperial banners would materialize like a phantom menace upon the frontiers of Hungary. This terrifying, unprecedented mobility bestowed upon him an epithet that would reverberate through the corridors of time, yielded him the Thunderbolt. There is no more profound testament to this absolute martial supremacy than the apocalyptic clash of 1396, the Battle of Nicopolis. By 1396, the Ottoman Empire was surging relentlessly into the Balkans, sending tremors of existential dread through the royal courts of Christendom. In a desperate bid for containment, an unprecedented pan-European coalition was forged. At the behest of King Sigismund of Hungary and Pope Boniface IX, the absolute zenith of Western chivalry united to expunge the Ottoman presence from the continent. This was no ordinary vanguard. It was a resplendent, heavily armored juggernaut. It encompassed the elite nobility of France, Burgundy, and Germany, marching shoulder to shoulder with the legendary Knights Hospitaller. Tens of thousands of Europe's most formidable ironclad cavalry marched eastward, suffused with an absolute confidence that bordered on blinding hubris. As they advanced, contemporary Western chroniclers documented their audacious vaunts, proclaiming that should the very heavens collapse, they would effortlessly uphold the firmament with the tips of their lances. Their objective was the strategic Ottoman bastion of Nicopolis, anchored upon the banks of the Danube River in modern-day Bulgaria. The Crusaders besieged the fortress, erecting opulent encampments, indulging in lavish revelry, and prematurely toasting to a triumph they deemed an absolute certainty. Their assurance was rooted in intelligence placing Sultan Bayezid hundreds of leagues away, deeply entrenched in a monumental siege of Constantinople. To redeploy an army from the gates of the Byzantine capital to the banks of the Danube would necessitate months of arduous preparation for any mortal commander. The Crusaders, however, possessed a catastrophic misunderstanding of the adversary they faced. When tidings reached Bayezid of the encroaching European behemoth at Nicopolis, he exhibited not a sliver of hesitation. He immediately shattered his own siege of Constantinople, galvanized his dispersed garrisons, and orchestrated one of the most breathtaking forced marches in the annals of military history. As recorded by esteemed Ottoman chroniclers like Ashik Pashazada and later corroborated by the bewildered accounts of Western historians such as Jean-François in his celebrated chronicles, Bayezid propelled his entire army, infantry, cavalry, and logistical train across the treacherous Balkan terrain at a blistering supernatural pace. He devoured distances in a matter of days that conventionally dictated weeks of agonizing travel. The Crusaders at Nicopolis remained blissfully oblivious to the impending tempest. So deeply entrenched was their arrogance that when forward scouts reported the Ottoman vanguard's approach, the French commanders dismissively threatened to sever the scouts' ears for propagating cowardly fabrications. Then, on the fateful dawn of September 25, 1396, the Crusaders awoke, cast their gaze upon the crests overlooking Nicopolis, and realized the impossible had materialized. The Thunderbolt had struck. Bayezid's genius, however, was not confined merely to velocity. He was a virtuoso of psychological warfare and battlefield topography. He acutely recognized that the heavily armored French knights were exceptionally lethal, yet intrinsically vainglorious and profoundly undisciplined. With surgical precision, Bayezid deployed his forces. He positioned a vanguard of light infantry and archers at the foot of a sloping incline, shielded by a dense camouflaged palisade of sharpened wooden stakes. Concealed behind the crest of the hill, entirely imperceptible to the crusading army, he stationed his elite shock troops, the heavily armored Sipahi cavalry and the indomitable Janissaries. On sighting the seemingly vulnerable, lightly armored Ottoman vanguard, the French knights obstinately demanded the prerogative of the first strike.
Defying the frantic, desperate cautions of King Sigismund, who intimately comprehended Ottoman stratagems, the French unleashed a cataclysmic, thundering cavalry charge directly into the center. It was the exact snare Bayezid had meticulously crafted. As the galloping French destriers met the concealed palisade, their devastating momentum was brutally ruptured. Stripped of their equestrian advantage, the knights were compelled to dismount and slog their way up the treacherous incline on foot, burdened by the crushing weight of their plate armor. Exhausted, suffocating within their steel carapaces, and convinced they had successfully decimated the Ottoman lines, the French nobility finally crested the summit. Instead of gazing upon an open field of definitive victory, they found themselves staring directly into the abyss, the terrifying, impeccably disciplined ranks of Bayezid's imperial army. The trap snapped shut with merciless, chilling efficiency. Bayezid unleashed his rested, heavily armored Sipahi cavalry. The depleted, dismounted French knights were swiftly encircled and systematically annihilated. Witnessing the utter obliteration of the invincible French vanguard, the remainder of the Crusadist coalition, including King Sigismund's contingents, succumbed to widespread panic. The Ottoman cavalry cascaded down the hillside, executing a flawless, inescapable pincer movement. The grandiose European alliance spectacularly disintegrated. Thousands perished in the ensuing slaughter, and the most illustrious nobles of France and Burgundy were seized as prisoners of war. King Sigismund himself narrowly evaded capture, fleeing into the night aboard a small vessel on the Danube. When we evaluate the enduring legacy of Sultan Bayezid I, the Battle of Nicopolis stands as an immortal masterclass in martial strategy. His adversaries whispered that he harnessed dark sorcery to traverse the map, but the reality was infinitely more intimidating. The true magic of the Thunderbolt was his absolute logistical supremacy, unyielding troop discipline, and a brilliant predatory intuition for exploiting his enemies' psychological frailties. He proved unequivocally that in the unforgiving crucible of war, sheer velocity and strategic deception possessed the power to shatter the heaviest armor in the known world.